Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're exploring the creepiest things people have seen in various places, from eerie woods and towering mountains to bustling cities and remote deserts. Get ready for some bone-chilling stories that will make you think twice about venturing out alone. I have a few stories, but one in particular comes to mind. I briefly lived in Connecticut in a Navy housing area and had a lot of strange experiences during the 8 months I lived there. The biggest one was something that followed me when I moved back home to New Mexico. One night, some friends in the Navy housing I was living in were hanging out in their backyard, which was next to mine. I went outside to smoke, and they soon started calling me over to look at something. It was dusk, and for context, our yards were on a hill that sloped down to a thicket of trees. They were all pointing towards the trees and freaking out, so I looked over and saw what I can only really describe as a barely opaque, grayish-black shape reminiscent of an oval, but it was hard to make out the edges of. It instantly stopped me in my tracks and gave me an unexplainable, urgent, ominous, and all-encompassing sense of fear, despair, anger, and impending doom. The shape was larger than a human, and way too weird to be any animal I know of, and its movement was somewhat erratic. It would seemingly be frozen, and then quickly jump and then hover between the trees. It quickly left, and we were all left pretty stunned, but no one there couldn't come up with any explanation other than maybe having drunk too much. The whole thing lasted about 3 to 5 minutes. An odd detail I remember is that the object seemed to be generally heading north. A few months later, I moved out of Connecticut and completely forgot about the incident for over a year. Then I moved into a new apartment. The day we moved in, I was standing outside in the backyard with my best friend and our dogs. It was daytime, and the yard was flat with a high fence. Things were calm and normal until all of a sudden the dogs started barking at something by the back fence, which was weird because they were not easily spooked and only really barked at something threatening. My friend and I looked up and saw the black spot thing, as I have come to call it, heading north above the fence line but below the telephone lines. I had to ask my friend to describe it to me because I had to be sure I wasn't just losing my mind, because the way it made me feel and how it looked made me instantly remember the first time I saw it. I hadn't told this friend or anyone about my first experience seeing it. The fact that it was in broad daylight made it even weirder and more credible for me. A few months later, the same friend and I were sitting in my car, parked in a gallery space parking lot, and he was looking down at his phone. I happened to look up in my rearview mirror and saw it again, going north. Without even looking up from his phone, my friend asked me if I had just seen it. I said, "Yeah, how the hell did you know?" And he said that he felt it. I have heard some podcasts talk about something similar, and sometimes I wonder if it is connected to shapeshifters. I will add to this if I see it again. It's been a couple years since the last time, but I don't think that will be the last time. In the mid-90s, I bought a 2-bedroom house that was built and owned by a senior couple. I had seen the husband at the signing but didn't meet him. My new neighbors were friendly, and I learned from them that the couple had not wanted to leave their house but had to move to an assisted living facility for the wife's medical needs. I had decided to use the front bedroom right away because there wasn't a ceiling fan in the rear room. I was certain this was the same arrangement the previous couple had used. One evening, my girlfriend and I were lying in bed after doing what couples often do when the ceiling fan began to pick up speed. A lot of speed. Way faster than it should have been able to spin. She pulled herself under the covers while I started to get up to turn the switch off. That's when I froze. My cat was sitting in the corner of the bed, staring at the open door. I called her name, and she didn't react at all, and had no care for the noisy fan that I thought might spin out of its base. In a few moments, the fan slowed back down to normal, but my cat sat frozen, ears up, like a statue, until the fan returned to normal. I saw nothing there. I found out a couple weeks later that the wife had passed right about the time of the fan incident. I moved to the back room about a month later and had a ceiling fan installed there in the spring. I lived there another 8 years with the same fan in that front bedroom without another incident. I went to lunch my junior year, 2004-2005, like any other day, and came back super late that day. I parked in the junior parking lot, which was all the way down the street from the school. I was walking with my Arby's back to art class to eat at my desk, when suddenly a van pulled up next to me, with a 6'2"-ish Mexican dude wearing all black. He hopped out and started walking next to me while the van drove slowly, and demanded I get in the van. I felt like my life was in immediate danger, but I said okay, and got in. It was a do-or-die moment for me. I figured I could fight my way out since I grew up boxing. Like that would work, right? The lady driving started driving away from the school once I hopped in, and the guy pulled the door shut. I started to panic. The guy wouldn't stop looking directly at me while sitting next to me. The lady driving was kind of big too, with long curly or wavy hair and rainbow sunglass lenses. I tried to get a better look at her, but the guy pulled me back and she pointed at the rear view and told me to look at her there only. I asked what they wanted from me. They wanted to pay me $10,000 to do a drug run across the border from Juarez. They were going to provide the car, told me I could keep the car, and told me exactly how they packaged the drugs, etc. They wouldn't tell me what drugs though. They offered to give me half the money up front. I kept telling them, "No, no, no. I think you picked up the wrong person." Finally, after telling them no over and over, I asked, "Why did you guys pick me?" And they said, "Someone at your school said you were crazy enough to do it." I continued to say no and to drop me off now. They eventually did, but they were almost 2-3 miles from my school. I walked all the way back to my art class, drink and food in hand, completely pissed off, shaking in rage and adrenaline. Out of anger, I flung my drink at the art class window outside. It exploded everywhere, and walked in yelling, "Now who the heck set me up?" My art teacher, who loved me, I was a top artist at the time, asked me, "What happened? What happened? Is everything okay?" The whole class froze in shock. Before you know it, I look outside, and the police, security, and the principal are walking toward my class. They got me and had me come into the principal's office and told me, "Look, you're not in trouble, but we need to know what you saw and if you got a license plate number. You're the 3rd or 4th student. This has happened recently and we're trying to catch these guys." Apparently, one of the cartels was targeting various high schools on that side of town. My parents eventually found out too. I feel lucky to this day that nothing ever happened to me or my family. I was camping in a remote area with my friends when we saw something incredibly creepy. We had just finished setting up our tents and starting a fire when we heard some rustling in the bushes nearby. At first, we thought it might be a small animal, but the sounds were too heavy and deliberate. As we watched, a tall, thin figure emerged from the trees. It was walking on 2 legs, but its gait was strange and lurching. It had long, spindly arms that reached almost to the ground, and its fingers looked like they could wrap all the way around a tree trunk. We were frozen in fear, watching as the figure slowly made its way towards us. As it got closer, we could see that it had a humanoid face, but its eyes were completely black, without any whites or pupils. It didn't make any noise, but we could feel a sense of dread emanating from it. Finally, it stopped about 20 feet away from us, just beyond the edge of the firelight. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching us with those blank black eyes. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared back into the woods. We were all shaken up and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. To this day, we have no idea what we saw, but we all agree that it was the creepiest thing any of us have ever experienced. I was in Madera, California, visiting my dad, and he took me to his work. He works on a farm for a major food company. Anyway, he's usually there alone, so this day he took me along. He just moved to California from Puerto Rico about 5 to 6 years ago, around Maria hurricane. While he went to start the water that feeds the plants, there were mile-long rows of these grape plants, which are actually very pretty. So as he was doing his work, I started walking around and exploring. I'm also originally from Puerto Rico, and I had never been in that part of California. I had only been to San Diego and LA in my Navy days. This happened around 2 p.m., and the sun was beaming hard. So as I was walking through these rows of plants, I happened to look through the rows, and I saw what I can best describe as a man dressed like the Undertaker from the WWF days. Long trench coat and black hat. But the thing was missing his legs, but it wasn't lying on the ground. The thing was floating, about 2 feet of ground. I stared at it, but I could see no face. His hat was down, and the way the sun was hitting it made it look just black. In other words, I couldn't see the thing's face. But I stared at it for a solid 10 seconds at least because the thing seemed so out of place. It was over 100 degrees that day, and this thing had a trench coat plus levitating. It was a humbling experience, to say the least. I started calling my dad, but when I looked back to see my dad and looked back towards the thing, it was gone in less than a sec, and these grape plants are not tall at all. I mean, there were rows upon rows of them, but the part I saw was on a small incline, so you could see kilometers before another hill would block the view. The thing was floating no more than 40 feet away from me, but I couldn't see its face. But the way he or it was positioned, it looked like it was looking my way. His shoulders were straight my way, but did I say it had no dang legs? It's funny now? But it was floating right around where his legs would be if he had any. It was about 7 feet tall. I'm 6 feet tall. In a complete black-looking trench coat outfit with a black cowboy-style hat. It's just crazy because I just stared at it, and it stared back. But I didn't feel fear, and everything was super quiet. No birds, no wind. It was eerie. I told him what happened, and he drove to the only person that lives around the area in a small house. A 62-year-old mechanic that's friends with Dad. And he told me those are the Watchers. He was so calm, like I didn't just tell him I saw a full-blown apparition, and told me not to be scared. He said that his dad and sister used to see them all the time, but he himself has never seen them. He talked about them like it was more, but he seemed to know how they looked because I only told him I saw a guy with no legs floating around in the grape field, and he proceeded to ask if the thing was dressed in black, which gave me goosebumps. After my incident, my dad told all his co-workers, and 2 out of 20 had seen the dang things. Have anybody from rural California ever heard of anything called the Watchers? The name sounds so cliché because the thing was watching me. But if someone has one, is it a good or bad thing to see one? Why can some people see them and others don't? Back in 2014, I went to a music festival in Central California. The drought was bad at this time, and the campgrounds normally would have overlooked this massive lake, but the lake was dried out, so you had these steep cliffs where normally the water would meet the campgrounds. My friends and I had an RV, and we splurged a little and got the VIP camping area, which was on this hill that had about a 25-foot dirt road next to us, and then a steep drop into the dry lake. I would say this drop would have been about 35-45 feet. The area would have been pitch black if not for this one large tree at 3 o'clock, and right next to the road, someone wrapped a strand of white Christmas lights around the base of it, and it gave just enough light to illuminate the area around it so it would not fall into the ditch or dry lake bank. It was the first night of the festival, and I was admiring all the starlight you could see in the area sitting on top of the RV, probably about 1 a.m. As I'm looking out into the horizon facing the lake, I start noticing these 3 spheres rising from the bank or dried lake bed, about 30 feet from where I'm at. They were very close, so the Christmas tree lights were able to light them up just enough to see they were like a brownish matte color. But when I initially noticed them, it's because their silhouette made the horizon black in passing. They were about the size of a small beach ball and completely silent. My first impulse thought was, Oh, someone lost their balloons, not realizing in that second how ridiculous that seems. But then, like an instant, my thoughts were, wait, who the hell is down there in the bank? Because it was all brush and very steep and dark. Then I realized they were not balloons. And these thoughts are all happening really fast, almost simultaneously with each other, because I'm trying to make sense of them. So then I thought, drones. But they were so close together and silent, with no lights or indicators of how they were floating. Then I thought, no, these aren't drones. And as I was thinking all of this, I was almost starting to panic because they were moving very, very weirdly. They rose from the bank, and when they moved, it was like one sphere would move, then stop, then another would move slightly closer to the first, then stop, then the last would move like to the sides of the other two, then stop. They were moving at an angle, rising from the bank towards the tree. So I'm starting to get scared as my thoughts are all happening at the same time, because I'm realizing what if I'm looking at, and as I start to panic, two of the spheres keep moving towards the tree, but one of them is stopped mid-air, and I lock onto it. I'm not sure what it was, but something inside me felt that it was watching me like I was watching it. I stared at this one for about 7-10 seconds. I was completely frozen with fear and didn't want to move. Then, as the other two got close to going behind the upper tree, the third one slowly started moving up in that direction, but completely smoothly this time. Their movements kind of reminded me of Tetris, but not so blunt. It's hard to explain. So then all three of these spheres go behind the tree, and I can't see them anymore, but I can see the dark silhouette of their roundness between the branches. In this moment, I was able to get the fuck up, climb down the RV, and go inside. I didn't come out for the rest of the night and made it a point to not be alone for the remainder of the festival. I was also completely sober during this experience. I'm not sure what they were. This one was not as long, and I was also drinking, but I have two other witnesses to back me up. I was basically out at my brother-in-law's house, and it was probably 1 a.m., and I saw some amber red glowing eyes out of his horse tank. My eyes were about 7 feet off the ground if I had to guess. But the scary thing is that when I saw this and pointed it out, and my brother-in-law and a family friend saw it, I pulled my pistol out, and my brother-in-law grabbed his AR-15 and it ran away like it knew what guns are. Another one from my childhood was when I was at my great-grandma's place for the weekend in a little town in Kansas called Slaughterwater. I woke up, and as any average little boy would, I decided to go outside and play in the dirt. The spot that I was in the front yard on the other side of a rose bush, and after about an hour of digging around, I got that overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. Everything went silent. I started looking around. For context, here my great-grandma's house was across the road, about 75 yards from the Shallow Water Elementary School, which was abandoned before I was born. But I looked up on top of the roof and saw this thing. It was jet black, looked like it had wings, and stood on two legs about 5-6 feet tall. So I froze up, and me and this thing had a stare down for what felt like forever. But in reality, it was maybe 10 to 20 seconds. It had massive red eyes, almost like a fly. That's the only thing I can really compare it to. But after the stare down, I decided to get up and run as fast as I could back inside to where my dad was talking to my grandma. I was screaming, and apparently I peed my pants. I was absolutely terrified, and I told my dad there was a monster at the school. He and my grandpa went out looking for guns in hand and didn't find anything. But later that night, while my grandpa was at work and it was just me, my dad, and my grandma, something jumped or landed on the roof of the house. My dad said that by the sound of the steps, it was on two legs and weighed over 100+ lbs. But it runs across the roof, jumps down onto the window air conditioner unit, and runs off into the night. So my dad and grandma stayed up all night locked and loaded with shotguns, absolutely terrified, while I hid in the basement with my dad. .22 revolver. But after that night, we never saw or heard from this thing again. IDK if it was the same creature I saw that was on the school that ran across the roof. But there was, and I think still is, something evil in that town. I refuse to go back. Well, I refuse to go back without being heavily armed. I've been part of a small paranormal investigating team, and I would consider myself a skeptic at best, but curious about strange events people encounter. Most of the stuff I've encountered is pretty benign, and we can explain something or another. There are two experiences, however, that stick out to me. The first was that we were investigating someone's house. Nothing too spectacular. 2 stories with a basement they have been in for a little while, but people always get uneasy feelings in the basement. We set up cameras and recorders around the house. Most of them didn't come up with much. But in the basement, we had a static camera that we set up, and you can see us walking away very clearly up some stairs and turning off the lights. Then, a few moments later, you just hear this heavy breathing right up on the camera for an extended period of time. Unfortunately, there isn't any video, because we're a bunch of idiots and apparently forgot to put on the IR. To this day, no one knows what that was, and the people still living there get uneasy feelings in the basement, like they are being watched and their dog will never go down there. The second thing was when we were investigating another home and doing an S-test session, which is where you have a person blindfolded and wear noise-canceling headphones to listen to a device that is rapidly scanning AM or FM radio waves. If they hear anything, they repeat it aloud. The rest of the group will ask questions or respond to the person. The idea being that the paranormal can interact with the device listening to the radio waves to make certain sounds or say certain things. You have the rest of the group asking the questions, so the person listening and repeating what they heard isn't influenced by the questions. Basically, we are trying to remove the bias of you thinking you heard something in your question because you want to hear it. We've had hit or miss results from this, but what happened was that we had a room of about 5 or 6 people all asking questions and such, with recorders and cameras getting stuff for us to review later. We didn't hear much during the actual session itself, but when we went back and listened to the recording of the evening, you heard what we can only describe: a music box playing for a short while before stopping. Not only do none of us who were in the room recall this happening at the time, but when asking the owners if they had anything that could even make this kind of sound in their house, they didn't. So probably not creepy per se, but still just an odd, not really explainable thing.